afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, and a very warm welcome to everybody today at this special event. My name is Michael Macaulay. I'm the Director of the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies here at the Victoria University of Wellington. And may I say, it's on days like today that I'm immensely proud to be the Director of the IGPS and to see such a wonderful audience. Forgive me for saying, but it's something that always impresses me after the many years I've now been here in New Zealand. The thirst for public debate and the willingness for public participation is genuinely a testament to everybody in this wonderful city, in this wonderful country. It's something that always puts a smile on my face and a song on my heart and a lovely throbbing sensation in the intellectual part of my brain. It's wonderful. Before we begin, I just want to say a couple of words about the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies. We have been around for a couple of years now. You may or may not know us in our previous incarnation as the Institute of Policy Studies, led ably by my wonderful friend and colleague, Professor Jonathan Boston. And we have a great tradition, and indeed we feel it is part of our public duty to promote political debate and public discussion that represent a range of opinions from across the political spectrum, and we have a great history of doing that, and we're very proud of that. And we're very proud to be able to continue that today. But IGPS is, of course, non-partisan, so the views that are going to be expressed today are not necessarily our views. So, with that in mind, it is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome today James Shaw MP, who is the spokesperson for climate change and economic development for the Green Party. James, thank you. I could have got you 2 rounds of applause there, James, I'm sorry. James will be speaking for about 15 minutes, and then there'll be a brief PowerPoint presentation. We should have about a full half hour for questions. So please, a huge round of applause. James Shaw.
Tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi nui kia koutou. Welcome, and thank you all very much for coming along today. I'd like to thank the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies, especially Michael, Adrian Macy and Maggie Hope for hosting us here today. I'd also like to thank a number of academics and experts who have given their time and their knowledge to inform this paper, and also a larger piece of work that has been undertaken by my colleague Dr. Kennedy Graham, which will be released at a seminar in Parliament later this month. It's been said that the human mind is not a terribly logical place. Most of us, given the choice between either facing up to a terrifying truth or conveniently avoiding it, will try to avoid it. That doesn't make us bad. It doesn't even make us particularly weak. It just makes us human. So I accept that. But I also think that it is true when it comes to really, truly crucial moments, like when people rushed in to the rubble to help those that were hurt in the Canterbury earthquakes, that we can muster the courage to face our fears and to act. The willingness to rise to the challenge when it really matters makes us human also. So we're all here today because we understand that climate change is not just the biggest issue of our time. It's the biggest issue of all time. The question facing New Zealand is, will we conveniently avoid the terrifying truth of climate change? And let's face it, it is terrifying. Or will we muster the best of our humanity, face our fears, and act on it? Our world is warming. 2 degrees and a metre of sea level rise are already locked in. There's actually nothing that we can do about it at this point in time. Last year was the warmest in recorded history, and the 10 warmest years on record have all been since 1998. Coastlines, like in Hoamoana in the Hawke's Bay, are disappearing. Previously fertile pastures are drying up. 1 in 100 year floods are happening every year in places like Dunedin and Whanganui. Species are falling into extinction every day, and that is happening now, and it is happening here. What happens next is really scary. So it is easy, very easy, to feel powerless in the face of this, to be so overwhelmed by the enormity of the threat posed by climate change that all we can do is block our ears, cover our eyes, and hope that it all goes away, which is pretty much how we're being encouraged to feel by the national government. The good news is that we have the power and the ability to do something about it. We can act now to protect our future, to save our environment and the way of life that we love. What is required is for New Zealand to play its part in the collective global effort to reduce our carbon emissions and to make the changes needed to live within our economic and our environmental means. So in December, as you know, governments across the world will gather in Paris to negotiate a new global climate agreement. New Zealand will be asked by what we as a nation are willing to do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Our answer to that question will define us. Sadly, the national government has chosen to set one of the weakest and most embarrassing targets that any country will take to Paris. We were reminded of this just last week when the climate tracker slammed New Zealand and Australia for pledging some of the poorest targets in the world, whilst others, such as the European Union, are pledging targets of 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. Our government has pledged a miserable 11% target. So to put that into perspective, if every other country was to do as poorly as our government is proposing to do, we would set in train a cascade of inevitable events that would change the face of our planet and which many scientists doubt that humans would survive. Yet our Prime Minister says that it is too hard, that we cannot do our fair share to protect the climate. Well, the Green Party says, yes we can. And we're going to show you how. So I'm here today to explain a new climate plan that demonstrates how possible it is to set an ambitious emissions reduction target, one that New Zealanders can be proud of. Our plan shows what can be done if politicians muster the will to do it. This plan removes what the government says is the big roadblock to action on climate change, which is agriculture. In it, we show how even with a 5-year lead-in time for the farming industry, New Zealand can still reduce its emissions by a very respectable 40% by 2030. Crucially, what our plan shows is that agriculture is not the block to a responsible climate target. The block is a lack of political will. Our challenge to the government is to muster that will, because the time for excuses is over. The climate cannot wait for politicians to stop squabbling. We can do our fair share. We can protect the environment that we love. And yes, we can have a climate target that we can be proud of, and this is a plan to get us there. So if we're talking about what we can do, it seems reasonable to ask what people want us to do. And a recent survey shows that a huge majority, 87% of New Zealanders, are concerned about climate change. By far, the majority of people who submitted to the government consultation wanted a target of 40% emissions reduction. That is not surprising, really. So we are not the sort of people who like being freeloaders. we're also the sort of people who have a deep appreciation for the big things that are worth saving, like our magnificent rivers, our beaches, our glaciers, our coastlines, our mountains, and our birds. We also like to think of ourselves as being good neighbours. I think that it hurts us to see our Pacific Island neighbours pleading for action from the United Nations as their coral reefs and their precious ecosystems are threatened by increasing temperatures and by the acidification of our oceans. Pacifica people are facing the very real threat of losing their entire homelands due to sea level rise through no fault of their own. It's not an option to ignore them. So we Kiwis take quite a bit of pleasure in the small things as well, things like coffee and beer and chocolate, and these things are also under threat from weather changes due to climate change. I think that they are worth saving, especially coffee, which I've had a lot of today. I think that the Prime Minister should have asked what we were prepared to fight for before he decided that it wasn't worth fighting for anything. Because we New Zealanders have a history of punching above our weight. Imagine someone trying to tell Kate Shepherd not to bother fighting for the New Zealand women to get the right to vote, because if they did, all the other women in the world still wouldn't have the right to vote. Try telling David Longy that there was no point taking a stand on nuclear ships, because even if he did, Russia and the United States would still keep their nuclear weapons. Try telling Sir Edmund Hillary that there was no point trying to climb Mount Everest because it was probably going to be too hard. New Zealanders did these great things because they were the right thing to do and because we can do them, because we could do those things. There is a huge benefit in being first, in being out in front, and in leading the world on the green economic revolution. As preeminent British economist Lord Stern made clear, those that seize the opportunities of a sustainable economy first will get the largest share of the benefits. So the longer we delay, the more we pay. The question is, can New Zealand lead the world and leverage off New Zealand's clean green image, off our expertise in renewables, off our pastoral nous to lead a modern, clean revolution? Well, we say, yes, we can. The thing that keeps coming up and which continues to be used as a roadblock to climate action in New Zealand is, of course, agriculture. So agriculture produces about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and as such, it's a political sore point that politicians have failed to solve. Whether it's farmers driving tractors up the steps of Parliament to protest the so-called fart tax, or the National Party gutting the emissions trading scheme, agriculture keeps being used as the excuse for inaction. But as the world warms, the notion of continuing to do nothing must no longer be an option. So we need to get that roadblock, that is agriculture, out of the way. And that's what we're proposing to do today. So I want to be really clear about this. The Green Party is absolutely committed that agriculture, along with all other sectors, eventually does its fair share. Our preference would be to incentivise climate-friendly farming by putting a charge on dairy emissions at $12.50 per tonne. That is equivalent to an 8 cents per kilo on milk solids. And to put that into context, milk solids have fallen 77 cents per kilo this year, and the price fluctuates on any given day by as much as 20 cents. But given the situation that farmers are facing at the moment and the desperate need for a lasting cross-party agreement on emissions reduction, the Green Party is announcing today that we would accept a 5-year transition period for agriculture if National commits to taking a bolder, more respectable 40% target off 1990 levels to Paris this December. So that is the quid pro quo. A significantly slower entry for agriculture in exchange for an achievable 40% target. That is a genuine, constructive offer to get the ball rolling on real climate action. Our point is, agriculture is not the block to achieving a responsible climate target, as we are so often told it is by the national government. The real block is the lack of political will. And I am sick of hearing from the national government how powerless we are. So this week, the Prime Minister told us that there is no point in taking a few hundred more refugees because that will not solve the crisis facing millions in Syria and elsewhere. The Prime Minister uses the same offensive logic about climate change. He says we're only 0.2% of the world's population, so anything that we do isn't going to solve the climate crisis, so why bother? Such logic is deeply undermining of the majority of us who like to think of ourselves as being more generous, more compassionate, and more responsible than that. It is also a deeply flawed logic. It ignores the scientific and the moral truth that everybody's actions matter. Importantly, the Prime Minister's constant use of the New Zealand is irrelevant argument also belies the role that we have as a global influencer. So there was a recent publication of a global soft power index in The Economist, which shows New Zealand scoring well in our ability to coax and to persuade. Victoria University's Professor Rafe Chapman, who I think is here today, thanks Ralph, wrote recently that we are not irrelevant when it comes to diplomacy or in our capacity to act as a global conscience. But, he warned, influence cuts both ways. So he wrote that a fundamental danger posed by New Zealand's policy stance on climate change is that our inaction will add to a sense of global powerlessness in the face of climate change, perpetuating indecisiveness at precisely the moment when it is most crucial to act. So by meeting the challenge of climate change, we can protect what we love and transform our economy and our society for the better. This is about modernising New Zealand's economy, encouraging investment in long-term sustainable jobs in industries that are growing, not just in industries that are in their twilight years. Later today, I'm going with our energy spokesperson, Gareth Hughes, to inspect a solar installation on a family home. Now, when I talk to people about going solar, it's not just the idea of doing their bit to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that motivates them to install a solar panel on their roof. It's about money, and it's about freedom. People like the idea of having power created on their own roofs. They like having more money to spend on other stuff instead of paying huge power bills. They like the feeling of being free and independent of big power companies. Solar is going off. Solar has grown by 435% in the last 2 years, and it is happening entirely in spite of the government. Imagine the jobs that could be created, the energy and the money that could be saved if instead of spending the time and the money backing polluters, the government backed Kiwis to achieve their own energy freedom instead. All we ever hear from the government are the costs associated with doing something to prevent climate change. Today, this morning, the Green Party revealed that the government has actually been hiding the true cost of taking action. The government has not been straight with New Zealanders. It has been hiding the true costs of taking action, and it has used phony numbers to try and make action look more expensive than it is. It produced one set of costings for public consumption, and it kept another set for itself. Now guess which set made taking action look more expensive? The reality is also that inaction is hugely expensive. In the UK, the Stern Review found that the economic impacts arising from uncontrolled climate change could lead to as much as a 20% reduction in gross domestic product per person. Globally, the cost of the damage that we will experience if we do not take action has been estimated at $20 trillion. Here at home, our Treasury has estimated that if New Zealand continues on its current trajectory of increasing net emissions and misses a 5% reduction target, that will cost us up to $35 billion. Climate change may seem like an abstract scientific problem that's sort of happening over there in the future to somebody else, but the reality is that it hurts our economy and it hurts our people, and it's happening now. And it is the most vulnerable that it hurts the most, because in effect, climate change exacerbates existing inequality. So be it our next of kin in low-lying Pacific nations, or those starving around the world from the impacts of climate change on their food supply, climate change unfairly targets the least most well-off. It also hurts workers. So already we are seeing job losses in New Zealand in fossil fuel industries, while the government stands on the sidelines with their heads in their pockets. West Coast miners have been dumped into the dole queue because the government failed to see that the fossil fuel industries were winding down, and it didn't have a plan to replace those jobs. There is so much that can be done to ensure a just and a fair transition to a low-carbon economy, but it will take action from a government that actually cares. If we think smarter than that, then we can answer the threat of climate change and inequality in tandem. Now, you may have noticed a familiar ring to the title of this paper. Yes, we borrowed it from Barack Obama. They say that plagiarism isn't plagiarism if you have a footnote, so that was my footnote right there. Yes, we can was Obama's call to action by those who were burdened by the lie of the impossible for too long. Recently, he has re-energized the Yes We Can refrain to call for action on the climate. President Obama has an action plan to loosen America's addiction to fossil fuels. Yes, unlike our government, he has a climate plan. And at the core of the Obama plan is jobs. Lots and lots of jobs. The US solar industry has added jobs 10 times faster than the rest of its economy in the past year. It now employs twice as many Americans as coal mining. In 2011, the global market for clean technologies was valued at more than 5.8 trillion New Zealand dollars. Investing in clean technology is sustainable, it's long-lasting, and it is very jobs rich. The estimated potential market share of the global green economy that is available to New Zealand has been estimated at $22 billion a year. So why would we not want a slice of that? New Zealand can be leaders in clean tech. It is a perfect fit with our clean green brand. And it continues to amaze me that our government has been so reluctant to back it. Now, I have been co-leader of the Green Party alongside Materia Turai for the last 3 months. In my inaugural speech as co-leader, I called for all political parties to work together and to build common cause on climate change. You might remember the Prime Minister's response. To paraphrase, no. I still believe that New Zealanders want their politicians to work together and to act in the common interest, and I am genuinely convinced that people are turned off by the endless political punch and judy show. When it comes to the huge threat posed by climate change, it is absolutely essential that we do all we can, not as little as possible. The Prime Minister says that we cannot have a proper climate target, and this plan shows that he is wrong. Just this week, Barack Obama gave a rousing speech on climate change, declaring that any leader who didn't take the threat seriously was not fit for office. It is time for the Prime Minister to switch his focus from doing as little as possible to doing what is possible. Tackling climate change requires leadership, but it will take effort from all of us. It will not be easy, but it is doable. We have shown today that there is room for common ground. Can we take a respectable target to Paris, one that we can be proud of? Yes, we can. Can we overcome the inertia of a government with no ambition, no ideas and no plan? Yes, we can. Here's a plan. Have ours. This 100% copyright-free, yours-to-keep climate plan shows that the Green Party is absolutely committed to action and challenges the government to do the same. The ball is in the government's court now, and I suggest that we all demand that they start playing. Thank you. So we have some detail to show you as well, because as we said, you can't just set a target and then have no plan. So I wanted to talk you through some slides which show sector by sector what our plan is here. I will move through these fairly quickly to make sure that you've got some time to answer some questions as well. So our target is a 40% emissions reduction target on 2020, and that is 100% achievable. Our net greenhouse gas emissions are currently around 68 megatons. So we need to get down to 40 megatons to achieve a 40% emissions reduction target. And so that is a cut of 28 megatons. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we get there. So first of all, across the economy, there are three main policies, and for those of you who are following the election last year, these will be familiar to you. So the first of these is a climate commission, which is an independent agency to assess the progress of the government's climate policies and to advise on how we're meeting our targets. So this would be very similar to the UK's Commission on Climate Change, Committee on Climate Change that was set up in 2008. Our Commission would have an ongoing role in setting the carbon price. The independence of the Commission from the political process is key, in the same way that our Fisheries Commission is set by scientists rather than by a group of politicians. National has gutted the emissions trading scheme to the point that it is not only useless but counterproductive. So emissions have actually risen under the emissions trading scheme rather than fallen. So we would replace the emissions trading scheme and we would put a price on carbon that is recycled into households via a tax-free income bracket, as well as a reduction in company tax rates. Now, a price on carbon incentivises cutting emissions. Carbon prices help technologies that can't currently compete with fossil fuels to be more cost effective. The third thing is the Green Investment Bank, which would partner with the private sector to fund new projects ranging from renewable energy to biofuel production to new clean technology projects. The bank would be funded from oil royalties, which we believe should rise to the international average. And this would give us more than enough money to pay for the initial outlay of capital. So what we've done differently here is that in addition to these cross-sector policies, we've also gone through sector by sector. So I'll just talk you through each of these. So in electricity, we have the capacity in New Zealand to achieve 100% renewable electricity generation by 2030 without compromising security of supply, and we can cut 4.8 megatons of greenhouse gases. Now there are a range of ways that we can do that. So we have abundant sources of renewable energy in New Zealand: wind, hydro, solar, geothermal. What we're lacking is political commitments, targets and policy mechanisms for helping us get to 100% renewable. We can support energy conservation much more, which is actually the cheapest way of making progress on this. And we can support distributed generation through initiatives such as smart grid technologies, real-time electricity pricing, limited fixed lines charges, and a fair price for those who are generating solar or other forms of microgeneration at home to sell back into the national grid. Our Solar Homes and our Solar Schools program will provide low-cost loans to enable households and schools to invest in solar panels, which will enable them to get free, sustainable power for decades once that's been paid off. Real-time electricity uptake reduces demand. Limited fixed line charges reduce usage, and they make solar more economic. Now in transport, emissions can be achieved by shifting to low carbon alternatives and to a range of other measures. And there have been decades of underinvestment in forms of transport other than motorways. So what we want to do is to reallocate, this is not new spending, we want to reallocate existing spending from new motorways and to invest in fast, reliable trains and buses and safe walking and cycling routes instead. So we want to design and build our cities in ways that make public transport more viable and make it easier for people to get around without a car. Our Safe to Schools policy would help build safe cycling and walking routes around schools and keep our kids safe while cutting emissions. And a student green card would give all tertiary students and apprentices free off-peak public transport. With these measures alone, we could decrease car use by about 2% per capita per year, and for context, it's already been reducing by about 1% per capita per year. We would also incentivise the uptake of electric vehicles and increase our fuel economy standards. So we want to bring in the same fuel economy standards as are present in the United Kingdom and in Europe today. So all we would be doing is adopting an existing international standard. We would invest $10 million in fast charging electric car refuelling stations and another $10 million in cashback payments to electric car buyers over time. And the Crown car fleet would be the first to convert. Leadership. So we think that we can also cut another 2.8 megatons per year by using biofuels in road freight vehicles, and to cut even more by shifting onto rail freight. And you saw this last week, Main Freight were criticising the government for underinvesting in rail, and I've spoken to large industry players around the country who are really interested in moving more of their freight by rail and are disappointed that our rail network is so shonky. So a decent price on carbon is also likely to continue relatively flat emissions at the moment from aviation, marine and rail. So I'll move on to the other combustion of fossil fuels. So this category covers the combustion of fossil fuels other than for electricity generation or for transport. And this is another area where a strong carbon price can make a difference. So we can cut 3.7 megatons off 2015 levels by 2030 by switching from fossil fuels to carbon neutral biomass, geothermal heat, or electricity. So energy efficiency, heat pumps and solar collectors can all be used to make reductions in home heating emissions. So just to give you an example, that would be Fonterra, for example, who after 2018 will be the largest user of coal for heat in their drying stations. So we'd work with them to replace that coal use with biomass or geothermal or electricity. So then there are other industrial processes as well. So some industrial processes, such as the manufacture of steel or aluminium or concrete, these produce greenhouse gas emissions as a byproduct of the industrial process, rather than by burning fossil fuels. Refrigeration and air conditioning fall within this category. They emit something called fluorogases or F emissions, and we believe we have the potential here to cut 2.1 megatons of emissions off a current level of about 5 megatons. Now, the European Union has already introduced a package of regulations to cut F emissions by 2/3 from their 2014 levels by the year 2013. So if we were to adopt the same regulations, we could reduce our annual F emissions by about 1 megaton below 2015 levels by the year 2030. And a further 1/3 of emissions can be cut if the Tiwai aluminium smelter is closed by its owners, which most commentators are anticipating will happen before 2030, and if we adopt new technologies in steel manufacturing such as CO2 capture and green coke, and these are new technologies that are showing some promising early signs. So we can further reduce emissions by reducing the demand. You'll never replace the demand for steel and aluminium and so on, but you can reduce demand for products such as, for example, using engineered laminated wood products, which will also store carbon for the life of the building. Now, waste is quite a biggie, so we're looking to be able to cut 3.6 megatons off our 2015 levels of 5.1, and that is because New Zealand is way behind the rest of the world on this. So we have the second highest greenhouse gas emissions per capita from waste in the world, and our emissions per capita from waste are more than double the average in other countries. Greenhouse gas emissions from waste is primarily methane, which are caused by biodegradable waste decomposing in landfills and dumps on farms. So our plan builds on work that is already being done by councils around the country that have already started to capture the methane at landfills. Increased recycling and composting, of course, will also reduce the amount of waste that goes into landfills in the first place, thereby cutting emissions further. And we want to increase the use of biodigesters, particularly on farms, and to bring farm dumps which are currently unregulated into the regulatory framework, which again is just something that's already been done in the United Kingdom. Their farm dumps were not regulated, and they're quite a big source of emissions. So the UK regulated those, and they're already seeing some emissions reductions from farm dumps. So we believe that that is an entirely feasible target there. Now, agriculture, which I mentioned, of course, in my speech, we do want agriculture to do its fair share along with all the other sectors of the economy, and so this is a constructive offer designed to get the ball rolling. As we know, agriculture is responsible for about half of all of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's about 39.3 megatons at the moment, and so far successive governments have given agriculture a free pass. Agriculture does need to do its fair share to help New Zealanders achieve a cleaner economy. However, we would prefer to incentivise climate-friendly farming by putting a carbon price on dairy emissions. But we are willing to accept a 5-year grace window before this kicks in to enable agriculture to transition if, as I said, National is prepared to agree to a 40% cut in emissions by 2030. So one way that we can reduce agricultural emissions is by government intervention. We propose that in 2020 the Climate Commission set policy to reduce agricultural emissions by 2.2 megatons, which is a very modest amount given that the total emissions are 39.3 megatons. However, if the agricultural sector were to take moves to reverse the trend towards overstocking farms, a move that has currently brought no financial rewards for farmers but has cost the environment a great deal, reductions of 2.2 megatons could actually be done without government intervention. So dairy scientist John Roche has said that farm profitability did not increase when herd size increased, and that is because when you increase herd size beyond what is sustainable and, for grass-fed, then you have higher input costs such as feed and other infrastructure. So we should be going for the value-added approach, which people have been saying for a while now. So all of those added together get us to 35% below 1990 levels, and forestry can get us the remaining difference up to our 40% reduction target. So if forests act as a carbon sink, they offset emissions that are made by other sectors. However, there's been a harvesting, there will be a harvesting glut starting in about the year 2020, and that threatens to undermine all of the gains that we're making in the rest of the economy as trees that are planted in the 1990s come to maturity and then are cut down. So these trees have masked the rise in gross emissions that has occurred in recent years. So I won't go into the nitty-gritty of the details here because that's all laid out in the paper and in our appendices. But to put simply, if we can meet our target if we limit deforestation, and by deforestation I mean conversion of existing forests into, for example, dairy farms, and if we embark on an ambitious tree planting program. So we know that 1.3 million hectares of marginal land is available for planting, and by planting at least 50,000 hectares annually of permanent pine forest on this land from now until 2030, we can sequester enough carbon to meet our targets. Another alternative is to plant 100,000 hectares of plantation forest between 2017 and 2027, which would also sequester enough carbon to meet our targets, but which would be available for harvesting later. So, in conclusion, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 1990 levels. Under these policies, we will have more vibrant, greener cities where the public transport is fast, clean, and affordable. Kids will be able to walk and to cycle to school safely, which will free up roads for commuters. And our exporters will be more credible, selling their goods to the world under New Zealand's 100% pure brand. Action on climate change is a win-win for people and for the planet, now and for the future. Can we do it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have some time for questions. We have two people with roving mics, I believe, over here and over here. If you could keep your questions as brief as possible. Yes, please. Let's start all the way at the back. Challenge to all microphones.
Thank you.
Just wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz Smith. I work in the water sector, and so it's great to see some really ambitious targets being taken in the climate change discussion. I was also pleased to hear you open with talk about agriculture. I just wanted to make the point that when we look at agricultural emissions, it seems that they're largely attributed to the dairy sector. And I think that's an important point because it misses some opportunities to talk